right, let's see.
Suggesting it's
Go live. All right.
Chris, I think your control panel is behind you.
Yeah, I know, it's fantastic, right? I need to get some crew back behind me, you know,
Yeah.
engineers.
Spock should be sitting standing there off to the left.
Yes, yeah.
And Uhura right behind you.
Right, right.
Oh, great.
Actually, now that I think about it, my setup here with the virtual camera is significantly like more advanced than what they originally used in the TOS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, since it is now exactly 7:30. No, it's not. It's only 7:27. 3 more minutes.
You're ready, Ajit. Always ready.
Stephen Arastu and I served on the National Youth Committee of Pakistan 50 plus years ago.
Oh, wow.
That's how long I have known Arastu.
Hmm. Somewhat longer than
He
me.
used to be young. He's young and handsome, but now he's older and handsome.
Still young, but not handsome anymore.
Say hi.
Wow.
So for those of you
Alana,
just
Chris, Charles, how are you?
Good.
good.
Stephen, do you remember us from New Jersey?
Yes,
Like
I
20
do. Good
years
to see you
ago?
both.
Yeah. Nice to see you.
You're from New Jersey, Alana?
Well, we're originally from Chicago, but when we were first married,
Yeah.
Charles did his postdoctoral work at we were in Princeton, New Jersey for about 3 years
Yeah.
before we came here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Freeth, I'd like to compliment you on your shirt.
Similar. It's very similar. Yeah, I know.
Outstanding taste.
Yes. Thank you.
25, 29.
Okay, so those of you joining us, just wanted to plug our speaker's YouTube channel. I'm going to put it in the chat. He has a wonderful active YouTube channel, and he puts a lot of great videos up there. Particularly the Call of Divine Beloved. There's a series that he had done right when that was released. So I appreciate that, Dr. Phelps. It was a wonderful series, 10-part series. And is that your living room in that series?
Yeah, that's our living room.
So I watched it again recently, and I just pretended that like I could actually go into somebody's living room like it used to be pre-pandemic. So.
It's weird now to think about.
Yeah.
It is.
Around
Yeah.
people.
But in some sense, Chris, this COVID thing has been a boon for us because we can get Stephen Phelps from the far west. Otherwise, we would have to say, let's buy you a plane ticket and get you a hotel room and see if you can come. This way, we have broadened our horizon a lot. It really, I mean, you'll see today there are people from all over the world on this call.
Hmm.
So that has helped a lot.
Absolutely.
Okay, Chris, 7:30. You let everybody in?
Everybody, I took off the locks of everyone's coming in. Who do I need to unmute? You said who reading the prayers? It's Ryan
Rihanna
and
Randall.
all right, is Randall here? Wait, no, whoops, sorry. Wrong one. Ryan A. Where am I?
If Randall forgot, then Rihanna will just go back with one prayer, move forward with it.
All right, that's true. All right, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everyone, and then you see Randall. I do not see him. All right.
Okay. Just stick with one prayer then.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Just
Friends,
sorry,
on
let
behalf
me
of
mute all real quick, but you have to
Okay.
unmute yourself. Sorry, I don't want anyone to unmute themselves.
All right.
Okay, there we go.
Friends, welcome one and all. This is such a joy and such a pleasure to welcome all of you to hear Dr. Stephen Phelps' presentation this evening. We've decided that during this time of COVID and maybe even beyond that, we will continue to have these presentations. It gives us such an opportunity to attract such a wonderful group of speakers from all over the country and sometimes even beyond that. So this is a great delight. As Baha'is, we always start things with prayers, and there are two prayer readers we had asked, Rehana Skui and Randall. If Randall is not here, then we'll just go with the one prayer that Rehana will read now. Unmute.
Hear me, ye mortal birds. In the rose garden of changeless splendor, a flower had begun to bloom, compared to which every other flower is but a thorn, and before the brightness of whose glory, the very essence of beauty must pale and wither. Arise, therefore, and with the whole enthusiasm of your hearts, with all the eagerness of your souls, the full fervor of your will, and the concentrated efforts of your entire being, strive to attain the paradise of his presence, and endeavor to inhale the fragrance of the incorruptible flower, to breathe the sweet savors of holiness, and to obtain a portion of this perfume of celestial glory. Whoso followeth this counsel will break his chains asunder, will taste the abandonment of enraptured love, will attain unto his heart's desire, and will surrender his soul into the hands of his beloved. Bursting through his cage, he will, even as the bird of the spirit, wing his flight to his holy and everlasting nest.
Thank you, Rehane. Friends, these have been somewhat difficult times, not just for us as Baha'is, but for the whole world. And we miss the human touch. We miss the ability to talk to people, meet with people, hug people. But somehow we have done okay with YouTube because we can talk to people still, see people. And the idea that we are unable to talk about our faith to people face to face has now faded away, and we say we can still do this, but we now have to do it on YouTube, and we can get speakers from all over the world to come in and talk to us. I'm delighted that we're doing this. We've been doing this for the past 8 months, and we will continue to do so even after COVID is over, hopefully very soon. Today, we are delighted and excited to have Dr. Stephen Phelps with us. Actually, when I looked at Dr. Phelps' bio online, I could have probably printed out about 30 pages. So I'm going to give you the Cliff Note version of his bio, and then I'm going to turn it over to him. Dr. Stephen Phelps received dual bachelor degrees in physics and philosophy from Stanford University and a Ph.D. in physics from Princeton University, specializing in cosmology. He served at the Baha'i World Center in Haifa, Israel for 13 years in its research department, where he coordinated the indexing and collation of the Baha'i sacred writings and the translation from Persian and Arabic into English. During that period, he concurrently held a research position in the physics department at the Technion University in Haifa and published original research on the masses of nearby galaxies. He currently resides in Portland area with his wife and 3 daughters. What an honor, what a pleasure. Stephen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ajit. Thanks. And thanks everyone for coming. I really only have to share with you a few disconnected thoughts this evening. And the topic I picked is the cosmic dance, which is, I guess, vague enough or broad enough to kind of cover anything. But as someone with a cosmology background, I always like to bring in something having to do with the cosmos and its largest scales. And that's really where I want to begin tonight. It's the question of that people have been, I mean, wondering for ages. And it's the question of what does the universe look like on the biggest scales? I'm going to share a few slides and talk my way through them, and hopefully there'll be plenty of time for conversation after these few thoughts are presented to you. Are you seeing my screen sufficiently? Everything looks good? Great. Okay. So just a few little questions to start us off with. What is the nature of reality? To what degree do we have access to it? How can we describe it? And it's often helpful in answering these questions, even though in another sense it's not helpful, to offer an answer by contrasting opposing positions. And it's typically, I found, the case that when one gets to the bottom of a question, one finds that the opposing answers that were your sort of initial thoughts when you thought about what the answers might be end up not being as opposing as you thought they were. And what I want to contrast in asking this question are what we might say are two main streams of thought, let's say ways of thinking about the world, ways of thinking about the universe that are dominant in the present day. One of them would say, well, when you look at the whole universe, what you really see is a lot of random motion. You see atoms buzzing around, planets and galaxies exploding and coming and reforming, and you see this profusion, this blooming, buzzing confusion of life on this planet, profusion of life, all in competition with itself and coming into and out of existence with no overarching discernible purpose. It looks like random motion at the largest scales. This way of thinking about the universe is, I would say, the dominant overall, let's say, ethos of the modern scientific worldview. That ultimately there is no underlying purpose guiding things, and that on the largest scales, really what we see is randomness. And if we do see apparent islands of stability, for example, on this planet, over the last few billion years, there's been life emerging through processes still mysterious to us, but sustaining itself miraculously over the course of billions of years, and beyond that, evolving, and not just evolving in necessarily random directions, but seemingly evolving in the direction of greater complexity, and in the direction of that ultimately leads to creatures like you and I that are able to think about and ponder these questions. But to those who believe that the universe writ large is really purposeless, random, then even the apparent evolutionary processes that we see on this planet over the last few billion years, the apparent march from randomness to order that we see in the evolution of higher life forms, even those, one would argue, from that perspective, are just blips in a larger time scale of randomness. They are illusory elements of stability within a larger fabric, a larger cosmic fabric that has no inherent directionality to it. Things are not moving towards any particular goal. That way of looking at the universe, which is quite, I think, pervasive, and among those favored with a more secular mindset, is contrasted to more, let's say, the traditional way of thinking about the world, traditional to most of the religious communions of the earth and beyond, that there is ultimate guidance. You know, from a religious perspective, there is ultimate guidance given by a creator, ultimate purpose given by our creator, such that at least on the largest scales, there is almost inevitable predestined outcomes that were baked into the universe from the beginning. From the perspective of, I think, most of the world's religious traditions, it's the overall story can be expressed in some version of the idea that there is a God or some other creator that wanted to create the universe for a particular purpose, brought it into being, and our lives are a small part of that universe executing its larger purpose. So from that perspective, we are on a path. Maybe individually we veer off that path from time to time. Maybe as a culture or as a society or as a nation, we may veer off that path for a few years, for a few generations, for a few centuries, but ultimately the path is determined. But when, again, putting on the glasses of a cosmologist and looking even further out into the universe and out into the deep stretches of time, there is an inevitable ephemerality to everything that we consider to be permanent. You know, even this planet, which we think of as the most permanent and stable thing, and which indeed has allowed, has provided this stable seedbed for the emergence of life over billions of years in a very continuous fashion. Even though that's the case, there is an expiration date for every planet, for every star. There is a lifespan to even the most stable configurations. There's an inevitable death to everything that has life, however long that we take that life to be. What we see instead on the largest scales, let's say cosmically speaking, is something closer to circular or harmonic motion. We see cycles that seem to be repeated. At the very largest scales, as far as we can discern, it would be the cycles of the birth and death and rebirth of stars that, you know, emerge from the initial clouds of hydrogen and helium gas that coalesce from the early moments of the Big Bang, that form the first generations of stars that collapse under their own self-gravity and begin to shine, and the attendant planets and other bodies that circle around those stars form for a period of time a cosmic moment of stability within which these apparent islands of calm and purpose may emerge, but then they're destined in the end to go dark, to go cold, sometimes quietly into the night, and sometimes with a tremendous explosion of light and heat and energy. But on the largest scales, the idea of motion being not necessarily entirely random and not just from point A to point B, but somehow circular, seems to be the rule of the rule of the day, the rule of the cosmos. But how does that fit against our traditional notions? When I say traditional, I'm talking about, let's say, let me confine my definition of tradition for the moment to the Western theological conception of time, which is that God created the universe at some definite point in the past for a definite purpose, which is in the process of being fulfilled, and that there's a definite moment when that purpose will be fulfilled, the coming of the kingdom of God in say Christian terms. How does that view of time, which is essentially a linear view of time, connect with or gel with, or is it just completely contradictory with this larger idea of time that we see when we look out into the cosmos of cycles, of really universal cycles of birth and destruction? And that's where I think we can kind of have our cake and eat it too, in the sense that when the cycles are large enough, we're talking billions of years, then inevitably our own historical consciousness is confined to a very tiny slice of that time. In the case of the human race, it's really just around 5,000 years of written records, generously speaking, that we have to access to form our sort of collective understanding of our own place in the universe and our evolution. And of course, the evolutionary and archaeological record itself allows us to extend that slice of time backwards by a number of millions of years by looking into the fossil record. But even so, when we look at, through that lens, what we seem to see is this linear progression almost, not necessarily linear. I mean, look at what happened to the dinosaurs 60 billion years ago. There's, apparently, this progression of size from the very small creatures to these enormous creatures that rule the planet, and complexity that went along with that. But it was all swept away in the blink of time by what we would take to be the chance event of an asteroid crashing near the Yucatan Peninsula 65 million years ago, which set the clock back, and seems to belie the idea of evolution and life on this earth obeying some sort of inexorable principle of forward motion. It's on even larger scales, I think, that we have to identify cosmic processes that might lead to that we might call ultimately progressive or evolutionary, in the sense that they inevitably bring forth order from chaos. But even on these time scales, because these are time scales of millions of years rather than billions of years, the arc of the circle along those millions of years looks straight to us, and that's how we can have a linear conception of time, even if the flow of time on the very largest scales is not linear but ultimately cyclical. It's this idea of cyclicality or circularity, which is we find a pervasive feature, not just looking out into the universe through a cosmological lens of modern science, but looking at some of the most ancient traditions of the human race that we have any record of. The idea of the circle, the idea of the Ouroboros, is a very ancient symbol that somehow appears from culture to culture, which is this idea of the snake swallowing its tail, which is an active, continually recurring process of birth, death, and rebirth. These ideas have been with us for a very long time. And indeed, when we look at the writings of the Baha'i faith, we find a similar marriage of the idea of linear time with the idea of cyclical time. The idea of linear time is certainly there in the Baha'i concept of progressive revelation, that the human race is on a path from a more tribal and disconnected state towards a more global and integrated state. One could state that almost in a sentence as one of the central theses of the Baha'i faith. One of the central claims of the Baha'i faith has something to do with, could be framed in terms of linear time, that there is a progressiveness to human civilization, a progressiveness to what we call divine revelation, the appearance of religions from age to age, and how these religions are all in each unique way reflective of and expressive of the particular exigencies of the day. But the Baha'i writings, and not just the Baha'i writings, but one finds, I think, a similar marriage of linear and cyclical time in other faith traditions as well. But focusing for the moment on what the Baha'i writings say about this, I think one of the central statements of this idea of cyclicality was stated by Abdu'l-Baha, the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, around 1906 or 1907. And he put it in the following words. I'm only going to have a few quotations, so this isn't going to be a quotation-heavy presentation, but this is quite a central one. So I want to read this in its entirety. Abdu'l-Baha said that the entire universe, whether with respect to the realm of nature or the realm of man, proceeds through cycles of major events and occurrences. When a cycle comes to a close, a new one is inaugurated, and the previous cycle, on account of the momentous events which transpire, vanishes so entirely from memory as to leave behind no record or trace. Thus, as you are aware, we have no record of 20,000 years ago, even though we established before through rational arguments that life on this earth is very ancient, not 1 or 200,000, or even 1 or 2 million years old. It is ancient indeed, and the records and traces of ancient times have been entirely obliterated. Cycles are inaugurated, concluded, and renewed until a universal cycle is completed in the world of existence, and momentous events transpire, which efface every record and trace of the past. Then a new universal cycle begins in the world, for the realm of existence has no beginning. And while Abdu'l-Baha seems to be speaking more within the framework of human history, that there were cycles in human history in which such momentous events transpired that we've lost all record or memory of the past. The same thing, as we know through science, is also true on larger timescales in the cosmological sense. Elsewhere, Abdu'l-Baha says in a talk that he gave in 1912 in the United States, there were many universal cycles preceding this one in which we are living. They were consummated, completed, and their traces obliterated. The divine and creative purpose in them was the evolution of spiritual man, just as it is in this cycle. The circle of existence is the same circle. It returns. The tree of life has ever borne the same heavenly fruit. These kinds of statements, I think, are an invitation to a particular way of looking at history, and a particular way of looking at where we are now and where we're going, in terms of, as Abdu'l-Baha puts it, the evolution of spiritual man, the evolution of spiritualized humanity. Whether, and of course, since we're talking not just this planet, but we're talking throughout the universe, then what we mean by humanity or man, in the sense, I think, isn't necessarily the 10-fingered, 10-toed, bipedal, hairless ape that has appeared on the surface of this planet, and through whatever accidents of evolution has the characteristics that it has, but rather we're talking about the capacity and potentiality, which is the hallmark of humanity, of curiosity about its point of origin and its desire to know it, which in theological terms is the, as Baha'u'llah expresses in one of his hidden words, speaking from the voice of God, I love thy creation, therefore I created thee. Wherefore do thou love me, that I may name thy name and fill thy soul with the spirit of life. In a couple of sentences summing up what Abdu'l-Baha has called the circle of creation, that there is or what we might also call the circle of consciousness, that the universe is here not to fulfill a particular endpoint in time, but to be the continual participant in an infinite unfolding process. And that infinite unfolding process is the process, it can be framed in different ways. One way to frame it is to say it's the circle of creation. One way to frame it is to say it is the eternal interplay between the creation and the return, between being born and and dying, and the next generation being born from what one leaves behind. Baha'u'llah puts it in another sense, that eternal constant that is reborn from age to age, and that is and that could be said to be the thing standing behind this eternal circle of existence. Baha'u'llah said that in every age and cycle, all laws and ordinances, he's talking about religious laws and ordinances, have been changed according to the requirements of the times, except the law of love, which like a fountain ever flows and whose course never suffers change. So one can talk about the circle of creation and as an infinitely and continually emerging consciousness, and that consciousness ultimately is self-consciousness, or consciousness of its creator. One can look at that same process by putting on a different pair of glasses, looking through a different lens, and that lens is, as Baha'u'llah puts it, the law of love. The universe is continually obeying and fulfilling the law of love. It does so in the most elementary atomic fashion whenever two hydrogen atoms fuse together to form a helium atom. In the most primal sense, the law of love is enacted in the coming together of the elements. At still higher levels, this law of love is enacted in the emergence of life. First of all, unicellular life, and then even higher degrees of love as cells come together to form multicellular creatures. And then that expression of love becomes even more complete when those multicellular creatures, when the light of consciousness is ignited within them, and they begin to burn with that light, and to burn with the desire to understand their origin point, and to return to that point of origin. That fulfills the largest motion of love in the universe. And this takes us to the nominal title of my comments, the cosmic dance, because another expression of this principle of circularity, this eternal principle of motion, the motion of love, or the motion of consciousness, or the motion of evolution, has been expressed in various cultures around the world as the cosmic dance, or the sacred dance, which we find so many different expressions of it. The cosmic dance of Shiva in the Hindu tradition, which is the dance of both life and death, which we're all participating in at every moment. The dance of the whirling dervishes, in which they express the union of the soul and the extinguishing of the individual ego in this state of fana, or the state of self-annihilation and reunion with the creator. Every native tradition, every indigenous culture has its own expression of sacred dance, as well as every modern culture. It is, as we all know, a pervasive feature of our humanity that we love to dance, and there's obvious secular reasons for that. There are, at the same time, I think, deeper sacred reasons behind that, because there's something about the dance metaphor, which is so wonderfully expressive of this principle of the cosmological circle, and which is so, I think, also wonderfully expressive of what we may say that what the ultimate purpose of life is. And just a few thoughts around why this dance metaphor is so powerful. In the dance, the individual is dancing their own dance. So it's a very individualistic expression of one's own sense of connection to those primal energies and to the spiritual currents of things. At the same time, there's an underlying beat or rhythm and chords to the dance that the individual themselves do not set. The rhythms of the cosmos predate us and will be around long after we're gone. And so although we're dancing to our own rhythm in a way that's very unique to our own personality and individuality, there is the flip side of that coin is that we're not in control of, we're not setting the beat. You know, we're dancing to a beat that's there. To put in terms of which I suppose would be consistent with a Baha'i view of history and where we're at now, that beat that we don't control is the inexorable attainment of humanity of its collective maturity. We can try to delay it through our actions. We can go along with it. We can try to bring it into being more quickly, but we can't stop it. And it's not something that we as individuals decide is there or not. There is an arc of history that we're participating in, and that arc of history, in the Baha'i view, is ultimately going to end in some form of world civilization, in which the various tribes, races, religions become interconnected to a degree that they have not yet attained. Another aspect of this dance metaphor is that not only do we not individually set the basic parameters of the dance, but we're not dancing alone. You know, we're dancing with each other. And this is something that's happening at a given moment in time, in space. We're also dancing with the future because we're interconnected, not just in space, but in time. Our actions and the manner in which we choose to live our lives has impact, obviously, on the generations to come. What we do or don't do with regard to taking charge of the and preservation of our environment, for example, is a way in which we are dancing with and impacting the future. And finally, the point of the dance is the dance itself. And this may be the most, I don't know, to me, the most powerful aspect of the dance metaphor. The point of the dance is not getting to the end of the dance. The point of the dance is being in it, being a part of it. We can say similarly, what is the point of human civilization? What is the point of being a part of this historical process? It's not to get to some point where we say, okay, now we've reached whatever our goal was, you know, the golden age, the coming down of the kingdom of God on earth, you know, to use the Christian phrase which the Baha'is, which the Baha'i faith also uses. But those of us are now living won't see these final endpoints, and neither will the vast majority of the human race. And are these final endpoints anyway? You know, will there be some point in history where we say, okay, this is where the goal was attained, or will it always be the case that the purpose of life is something which is expressed and fulfilled or not, depending on the individual volition at every moment and within every moment of each individual lifetime. Somehow, though, we have lost the dance. We've sort of lost the rhythm. We've lost the beat. And I just wanted to give a shout out to a book I've read recently called Galileo's Error. And I say this as a scientist with full faith and confidence in the scientific method. But what this book has done, I think, quite persuasively, is highlight just what it is that we left behind when the scientific method was defined by Galileo and others a few hundred years ago. It was as though a decision was made for very rational reasons that although we experience the world in a variety of modes, we can only objectively agree about the world when it comes to describing the world in physical terms, in terms that we can measure, so that I make a measurement and I share that measurement with you, and you'll always agree or disagree with me. There will be an endpoint to the conversation as to what the ultimate physical reality is if we confine ourselves to things that can be measured, touched, things that are tangible. That was a decision that was made in the definition, let's say, not necessarily the definition of the scientific method, but in the way that the scientific enterprise was executed from its earliest years until the present time. It's as though, to use the metaphor of Plato's cave, of the prisoners chained to the floor of the cave, condemned their whole lives to see nothing but the shadows on the wall, whereas behind them the actual objects were being cast through torchlight, onto that wall. But we're never able at any point in our lives to turn our heads around and to look at what's behind us. We're always confined to looking at those shadows on the wall. It's as though the scientific method and what this author has called Galileo's error, we could say more Galileo's convenient simplification, is the nature of the simplification is to say, well, let's not talk about what might be behind us, since we're never going to agree on that. All we can agree on are the shadows on the wall. So let's just talk about those. And the shadows on the wall have depth, have length and width and duration, and we can talk about that. And we can formulate our theories about that. And it's turned out that that's a very useful way of describing the world purely in these material terms. What I'm describing is the philosophy of materialism. What happened, though, and this is where the author of Galileo's error, I think, makes a good point, is that Galileo never intended to deny the reality of all of these other things that we also experience, besides length and width and weight and all of these measurable things. We also experience things like color. We experience, just to give a physical example of something, and then even more subjective things like emotions. These end up getting cut out of the process. These end up getting pared away from our description of reality to be able to make the simplifying and useful approximation that has driven forward the modern era and enabled us to make all the great discoveries that we have in the name of science. However, we make an error when we then overreach the assumption or the approximation and say, well, the shadow is all that exists. That's where we make the error. It was originally just a way of simplifying. It was originally just a means of being able to navigate the world in a way that produces a certain kind of consensus. But if we take that extra step and say, well, the only thing that's real is that thing which is measurable, the thing that we can fit on a Cartesian coordinate system, then we've left out what's actually the thing that makes life worthwhile. We've left out the spiritual component of reality. We've decided that we've decided so long to look at the world as in black and white that we're now going around and saying color doesn't exist when everyone experiences color. But nevertheless, we're all saying to each other, yeah, color doesn't exist. Those of us who are sort of embedded in this sort of secular mindset. So in that way, we've lost the dance. We've lost the beat because the rhythm, the beat of the dance is contained behind our backs. It's not in the shadows on the wall, but it's in that part of reality that we don't have the direct perception of. It's in what Baha'is would call the spiritual reality. So how do we regain that rhythm of the cosmos that we've lost? Abdu'l-Baha would say, it's here already. It's always been here. And Baha'u'llah would say, it's closer than your life's vein. It's just a matter of opening your eyes and recognizing that it's there. Abdu'l-Baha states so beautifully this principle of renewal of creation, which we are in the midst of, even though the events of the day seem so dark and hopeless. These sorts of words give us hope that the dance is still ongoing, even in dark times. Abdu'l-Baha says, when the sun of reality shed its endless bounties from the dawning point of all desires, and this world of being was lit with that sacred light from pole to pole, with such intensity did it cast down its rays that it blotted out the Stygian dark forever, whereupon this earth of dust became the envy of the spheres of heaven, and this lowly place took on the state and panoply of the supernal realm. The gentle breeze of holiness blew over it, scattering abroad sweet savors. The spring winds of heaven passed by it, and over it, from the source of all bestowals, were wafted fruitful airs that carried boundless grace. Then the bright dawn rose, and there came tidings of great joy. The divine springtime was here, pitching its tents in this contingent world, so that all creation leapt and danced. So that's the end of my comments, and invite your feedback and questions or anything you want to contribute.
I want to say something here. For those of you that have questions, please put them in chat. Type them, and Chris Bishop or I will read them. For those of you that are out there on the Facebook or YouTube, etc., my phone number, write this down, 281-788-0380. 281-788-0380. Please text me your questions. I will read them to Dr. Phelps on your behalf. I have a question I would like to ask Dr. Phelps. This has to do with Hindu cosmology and their notion of circular time, that there is a cycle of 324 years of different stages. I grew up a Hindu, hearing all this. I don't think I know anything about it. Do you have any thoughts on that? Would you share some thoughts on the Hindu cosmology? If you,
I couldn't say much about it beyond what you've just said, that the cycles in Hindu cosmology are definitely run into the millions and billions of years. In that sense, it puts them, it's kind of curious because the Hindu cosmology is one of the oldest that has come down to us, and yet it's also the one that best captures the actual timescales of the universe, which we know are in the billions of years. And the cosmological cycles in Hindu cosmology go even beyond the age of our universe, which, although I would not want to read them literally and try to parse anything from the numbers that are found in that theological system. It nevertheless, I think, makes us think about the possible limitation even of our current cosmological conception of the universe, which is just 14 odd billion years that since the moment of the Big Bang. How do we know this is it? How do we know there weren't an infinite number of Big Bangs preceding this one in time or parallel to us in space? How do we know that there aren't, that this isn't really a multiverse? It's a fashionable idea now for which there's no hard evidence, but a number of lines of thinking, and at least in physics, make this idea plausible. But whatever the case, it's all just an extension of the principle of the circle of existence. I mean, however, whatever the reality is, whether there's just, whether there's a multiverse or what kind of multiverse it is, or whether even it's just, I guess the hardest option would be if this 14 billion-year-old universe is really all there is. If that is the endpoint, then it would be a curious conclusion that we really are living in linear time, in a universe that has a beginning, and if our cosmological computations are correct, will sort of end in a kind of whimper with the burning out of the suns and the expansion of space, to such a degree that that everything just becomes dispersed and dark and cold. But that's ultimately a linear picture of time that our best cosmological observations find in the end are giving us. If we take any kind of inspiration from these more traditional cosmologies, and I think there are hints in physical cosmology as well that such might be the case, then this universe we live in, for all its age, may actually end up by collapsing back into itself, and then re-expanding in some other way. I don't know. It's all speculation, but it's fun speculation.
So here's a question from John Harkness, and John lives in Texas City, Texas. And John asks, are there some parallels to understanding the meaning of the universe and understanding the meaning of the manifestation of God?
Well, certainly. One of the principles of the Baha'i Writings that I find endlessly fascinating and productive is stated in a work of Baha'u'llah that unfortunately has not yet been translated into English. But to paraphrase what Baha'u'llah says in this work, he says that everything that exists in this world, form, substance, everything that we can sort of pinpoint and wrap our minds around, Baha'u'llah says there is a corresponding reality in each one of the worlds of God. It's just mind-blowing. It's not just a sort of a two-part universe where, there's a physical world and what we see are shadows of the spiritual. That would just be, the standard Platonic conception of it. But Baha'u'llah goes further, and he says that there is almost a principle of correspondence, a principle of repetition of form or repetition of archetype, which is infinite. It's the idea of the universe as an infinite pattern of, like those Russian dolls, you break one open and there's a smaller one inside, and you never get to the end. I mean, in real Russian dolls, you do get to final one in the middle, but the cosmological Russian doll scenario, it's dolls all the way down, and it's dolls all the way out. I find that fascinating. I also find it, plausible in the sense that a circle requires less explanation than a line. Because with a line, you have to explain, well, why is the endpoint here and why is the other endpoint there? But a circle requires, with a circle, it requires less explanation. You have to define the radius, I suppose. But you can also abstract away the radius by saying, well, the units that I'm talking with, by a suitable transformation of units, you can evade the question of the radius of the circle. But when you're talking about linear time that has beginning and ending, it raises the question, well, why is the beginning point thus and why is the end point thus? And cosmologies that do away with beginning and ending points, cosmologies that are cyclical, and conceptions like in this work of Baha'u'llah's that doesn't just look at the world as physical and spiritual, because those are two more endpoints. It's like, okay, well, why is the world divided into spiritual and physical things? Instead, if you have an idea of, well, there's a replication of patterns and there's no beginning and end to it, then it's cleaner in a way. I don't know. For me, one can always come back and say, well, but it violates Occam's razor. Occam's razor would say, the simplest universe would be, is the most plausible one. And is it the simplest universe when you have an infinite number of them? From one perspective, yes, it is. It's simpler in that it doesn't if every possible thing really is, then you don't need to answer the question, why then this set of things and not that set of things? Why are the physical laws of the universe what they are? Why is the strength of the gravitational constant what it is? Why is the strength of the electromagnetic field what it is? And why are there 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time? And why are the strong and weak nuclear forces constructed in such a very weird and asymmetrical way? Well, if every possible configuration really is, then that kind of answers the question. It doesn't answer it in a very, a scientist would come back to that and say, well, that's a very unscientific answer, because you've now invalidated the legitimacy of the question. There's no longer any point in asking the question, because you're proposing a universe in which a universe of infinite plenitude, to use a phrase of the Neoplatonists, in which the creative principle is so bountiful, is so infinitely productive and creative, that every possibility gets created, and that ends up obviating the question of why this particular universe was the one that was chosen to be created. And this is all speculation, but I find it really fun to think about.
My friend Sue Emil from New York, I think, reminds us that the cosmic dance is called Leela in Sanskrit, which is true. Thanks, Sue, for that. Question from Khotan. How are scientists and various disciplines of science talking about and exploring consciousness as human reality?
This is where consciousness is kind of coming back into vogue and being talked about now by serious philosophers and by serious people in neuroscience. Not certainly in anything resembling a traditional theological context in which one is coming at it from, say, a perspective of Cartesian dualism, that there's a material reality and this invisible spiritual reality that we're investigating. The present day science of consciousness and philosophy of consciousness is still overwhelmingly being explored from a secular perspective. But one thing that's interesting about it is that the dividing line between matter and spirit, which seemed so solid around the time of Descartes and around the time of Newton, and which is still, I think, with us in the way that we in the West think about the world. That bifurcation of reality into material things and mental or spiritual things is being re-examined by the modern theories of consciousness. And Philip Goff's book is the one that I showed the cover to would be a great entree into that, if you're interested in what some of the latest ideas in the philosophy of consciousness are.
Okay. Next one. Abel Seal makes a comment. It says fractal nature. I don't know what that means, but I'm not a scientist, so it must have some meaning.
Well, that's like that's almost like that statement by Baha'u'llah that I paraphrased is almost a fractal statement about reality, that things look a certain way, and as you zoom in, it looks the same. Like a coastline, the jaggedness of a coastline is a great example of a fractal. You zoom in on it, and even the zoomed in part has that same kind of jaggedness to it. And you can zoom in orders of magnitude, and it doesn't fundamentally look different. Maybe that's a descriptor of the universe as it relates to these repeating patterns that we see.
Linda Lee Senyakov says, I'll take Russian nestling dolls over fractals. Is that Linda Lee's question, or did Sergey tell you to ask that question, Linda Lee?
Yeah.
Do you know Linda Lee and Sergey from Haifa?
Yeah, actually, Linda Lee was my first Ruhi tutor before it was called Ruhi Book 1. I took Ruhi Book 1 from Linda Lee. Haifa, 1993.
Oh my God. From Bijan, Masumian to everyone. It says the earlier quote from Abdul Baha noted that the purpose of these universal cycles were to ultimately develop the spiritual man. Then why do we have these cosmic catastrophes that obliterate everything, including the spiritual man? Remind me of what Tibetan monks do with creation and destruction of mandalas. That's a good, very interesting. By the way, Bijan is Adib's father, if you didn't know.
Yes, I know.
So, yeah.
That's such a great question, because that drives at the very heart of the difference between thinking about time in a linear way and thinking about time in a circular way. You know, if the point of creation, if the purpose of creation is fulfilled in every moment, then the attainment of spiritual man is not something that happens at any given point in time. It wasn't a historically definable moment, such as 100,000 years ago when we attained self-consciousness, and the traces of that remain, say, in the story of Adam and Eve. Although that may be the case, the real attainment of spiritual man is something which is part of the dance of the cosmos as a whole. I mean, it was taking place before the human species existed on the planet. I mean, one can take that question and kind of translate it into a very similar question, which is, if the purpose of creation, as say Abdu'l-Baha says in some Answer Questions, is the production of spiritual humanity, the appearance of the human soul, then for billions of years that purpose was unfulfilled on the surface of the earth, because for 2 billion years there was nothing but a soup of bacteria, and then more recently you had these other fish, and then dinosaurs, and then early mammals, and so forth, and then us. Well, if, as Baha'u'llah says in his book of Laws, this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future, then, well, if it was really eternal in the past, then where was the faith of God 10 million years ago, or 100 million years ago? There were no prophets, there were no books, there were no people with consciousness to sort of think about these questions. But Baha'u'llah assures us that faith of God was changeless. It was there a billion years ago. How was it there a billion years ago? It was there in the processes of the universe itself, which are all interrelated with each other in a way that that even when we ourselves are not physically present on the planet, nevertheless, the purpose of creation is being fulfilled even a billion years ago at the stage of the primeval ocean. It takes us out of the realm of thinking about purposes as historically conditioned. That's what I think the idea of cyclical time does. It really is a paradigm shift, I think, in the way we think about we think about a lot of things.
Wayne Talbot sent us a quote. He says, "I see a time when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again." And this is from Crazy Horse 4 days before his death.
Yeah.
So that's the question that comes online. And the question is, it says, can Stephen talk briefly about the cosmic cycles involved with the Baha'i calendar?
Which ones? In the Baha'i calendar?
I don't know. Yeah.
I wasn't aware of cosmic cycles having been defined. Was this defined by the Bab or something in one of his works when he instituted the Baha'i calendar? I wouldn't be able to speak to that. Beyond what I shared on the slides with regard to Abdu'l-Baha talking about universal cycles, I'm not aware of anything more detailed than that.
This next question comes from Ilana Jackson. And Ilana says, if you had control over the world's budget, how much money would you devote to cosmology?
All of it. All of it.
It's better than war.
Yeah.
Sue Emil says, the destroyer and the creator are names of God we call in the long healing prayer of Baha'u'llah. These names are called in the ancient Vedic and Hindu scriptures as well. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Mark Aflatuni says, how does all this tie into popular theories today, like The Secret? I don't know what that is. About the manifesting, desiring realities. Are they tapping into the bird versus its shadows cast on the wall of the cave? I'm reading the question. I'm not sure I'm totally getting it.
I haven't read The Secret, but I've heard people talk about it enough to think I know something about it, which is the simple idea that one's intentions manifest a reality which is potential, and that's the most powerful thing is really about humanity, is our ability to manifest potential realities through our intentional actions and through our living intentionally. And I absolutely do think that if that is the right idea behind the Secret, which here has been defined as the law, also the law of attraction. Well, what's being attracted? There's something behind, prior to our understanding of things that we are, whether or not we've decided we are attracted to this thing, which goes back to the point I made earlier, that we don't set the parameters of the cosmic dance. The rhythm of it is there in a way, and our primal attraction to our origin point is something which we also cannot forever deny, and we will only ever truly be happy when we align ourselves with that cosmic dance, when we align ourselves with the breeze of the merciful, as Baha'u'llah calls it, which is the breath that emanates from the one, and that also is the inspiration that returns to the one, which is the whole principle behind a lot of meditative practices, which focus so much time on the breath. Why is the breath like such a big deal in meditative practices? It's because it's circular. The inhaling and the exhaling is recapitulating in a microcosmic way this big picture circle of the universe, because the whole universe is an act of exhalation of the breath of the merciful, and all the spiritual degrees, such as the ones Baha'u'llah writes about in the Seven Valleys and elsewhere. Those are all part of the inhalation, the reciprocal movement. Abdu'l-Baha calls it the Ark of Descent and the Ark of Ascent. This is part of the that, say, pre-existing structure of things that we are born into. And that's another way, I think, of contrasting the Baha'i view, or any I think really religious view or sacred view of to use a better word, a sacred view of the world from a secular view. And there's a lot of ways that one could divide it up, but the one way that I find helpful is that a secular view of reality sees every direction as fundamentally equal to every other direction. It's a statement of random. It's another way of stating the principle of randomness. There is no embeddedness of purpose or goal in the universe. And the most you can do with that secular perspective is, and the highest philosophy you can probably attain within that secular perspective would be an existentialist philosophy, which would say the universe is cold, cruel, pitiless, heartless, without purpose, but we create our own purpose, and we have this power to create our own purpose. And that's kind of the end of the road when it seems to me, when it comes to a fundamentally secular way of approaching the universe. And that's contrasted with this other way, the sacred way of looking at the universe, which is we are born into a movement that we did not originate and that we have no control over. And our happiness and our fulfillment as human beings is inevitably attached to the degree to which we align ourselves with that pre-existing structure, that pre-existing form. I'm just using a lot of words to describe what more simply would be called, we're created to know and to love our Creator. We're created to love other people, because in loving others, you know, to love another person, to quote Les Miserables, to love another person is to see the face of God. There's a reciprocity there also, when the love of other becomes a love of God. And of course, he who knoweth himself knoweth his Lord. So the whole cosmic dance is really, to paraphrase, I think, Carl Sagan, is we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. You know, the cosmos knows itself through us, and in knowing itself, it knows its creator. And in knowing its creator, it loves its creator. All these ideas form this, I think, beautiful, a beautiful rhythm of life, which we're all a part of, and that is external to us in a sense. I mean, it's deeply internal to us, as Baha'u'llah says in the Hidden Words, turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee. But it's also external to us in the sense that we're born into a matrix, a social matrix, a civilizational matrix. And our greatest fulfillment comes through loving others, by being a part of and building an ever advancing civilization, by being of service to others. All the things that we talk about in our day-to-day Baha'i lives have this deep cosmological connection with the circle of existence. You know, the whole idea of Baha'i service is an expression of that circle of existence.
This is a very interesting question. It says, this is from Wayne Talbot. It says, does the quantum concept of connectedness, that everything affects everything else, support the idea that prayer is a process that has a scientific basis for effectiveness?
Quantum entanglement can be used as a black box into which one can insert whatever one wants to insert. To use another metaphor, quantum entangledness and quantum indeterminacy is like a blank check that one can write, and you don't know how much is in the account, but people write all sorts of amounts on that blank check. We don't, although it's true that quantum weirdness, you know, the sort of the fundamental indeterminacy and interconnectedness of things at an atomic level and potentially at macroscopic levels through quantum entanglement is a reality. And it does absolutely overturn our Newtonian picture of the world as a bunch of little billiard balls banging against each other. You know, that's what atoms are, and that's kind of, you know, that's the, I don't know, the freshman physics view of the world. Although, you know, the quantum concept of connectedness certainly overturns that, I would be careful inserting into that our received ideas about prayer. And that's a whole nother, I suppose, hour-long talk potentially. But I'll briefly suggest that one can think of prayer, the effectiveness of prayer, the power of prayer, as the thing that happens when one aligns oneself internally with the cosmic dance. You know, as long as one is moving at cross purposes to the rhythms of the universe, one is not going to make progress, or progress will be very slow and difficult. But when one aligns oneself with that motion, and that motion is towards unity, and that motion is towards togetherness, and it's towards love and all the things that we know and practice as a Baha'i community, and that people of other faith traditions also do. Anyway, I'll just leave that there.
So a couple of comments from Bijan Masumian. He says secret is equal to love. And secret from April, it says secret is equal to the law of attraction. Those are both. Chris Bishop, if you were to suggest one short passage for everyone to read tonight before bed to explore and ponder this issue, what would it be?
Well, that passage from Abdu'l-Baha that I concluded with, it's just, I love it. I mean, because it doesn't convey any like philosophical content, but it just conveys this sort of pure delight is the only way I can describe it. And I think we all need a good dose of that. And what I would suggest is to search for the rest of that quote, because that's only a piece of it. Abdu'l-Baha just goes on and on in this vein of just like, I don't know, it's just a shower of spiritual sparks is what that tablet is.
So Hutan asks, how does physics try to explain the physical phenomenon of quantum entanglement?
So
how does physics explain?
Do we want a physics lecture? Well, how does it try to explain it? Well, in the end, it probably means that non-locality is a thing. I suppose in the end, that's the deeply disturbing thing about it, is that we have a strong intuition that everything is divided up into atoms, and that these atoms are fundamentally separate from each other. And that intuition is all the way up the chain of being, you know, from actual atoms that we learn about in science class to people. You know, we have this intuition that we're fundamentally separate from others. We're like billiard balls just bouncing around. And if we come together at any given point in time, it's kind of an accidental arrangement, and the next moment it can be dispersed again. The idea of quantum entanglement completely overturns that, and it overturns it in such a fundamental sense. It doesn't just say that, yeah, it's all connected. It says something more disturbing than that. I mean, it says that there really is only one thing. You know, that the idea of separateness is illusory. And that's where I think the religious traditions, particularly the mystical traditions of all the faith communities in the world, have this common challenging secret at their core, which is that we're not actually separate from each other. We're not actually separate from God, and that can be misstated as an expression of hubris, and say, okay, well, I'm God, so I can do whatever. You can obviously take it in abusive, as I say, spiritual abusive directions, or you could take it in the direction that was intended, which is the direction that the Sufis called fana, or self-annihilation, in the direction of the utter extinction of the individual ego and individuality, and it's merging into a greater reality, which can be described as God, or the truth, or the true one, al-haq, or it can be and all souls merge into this. There's some tablet that maybe the one thing I would suggest is from a tablet, you know, to go home and meditate on. I just thought of one, and it's from a tablet by Abdu'l-Baha, and it's I'll find it hopefully as I'm talking, because I'm doing a search as I find it. Abdu'l-Baha talks about how we should become. He says, and I'm going to post this into the chat. It's a very short statement. He says, release yourselves from this world's life, and at every stage long ye for non-existence. For when the ray returneth to the sun, it is wiped out. And when the drop cometh to the sea, it vanisheth. And when the true lover findeth his beloved, he yieldeth up his soul.
Yeah.
I think the secret
can I say something?
Yeah.
Growing up with reincarnation, the notion of my soul, my Atman, becoming one with Brahman and losing itself was one of the things that I had such a problem with reincarnation, that I will have no personality later. So, I mean, I have to tell you, as a former Hindu, that was one of the things about Hinduism that I just, anyway. Thomas de Leon asked a question, makes a comment. He says, I love everything you have said, but the idea of being born into and from a creator speaks of separation language. I'm okay.
Yeah, That's a great point. And that's the primal movement of creation, though. I mean, if there weren't separation, there could be no unity. If there wasn't two, there could, the one becomes two, and then the two becomes all things. To quote the first sentence of I think it's the Tao Te Ching. There's a beginning principle of unity, and for there to be a story, for there to be something to talk about, for there to be us to sort of to even discuss this, that unifying or originating principle has to separate at some point. I mean, there has to be separation. Maybe there are universes in which that never takes place, but then you won't have people talking about it. In the physics world, we call this the principle of what do they call it? Why is the name escaping me? The Anthropic Principle. It's like the fact that we're sitting here talking about things places certain constraints on the kind of universe we could be talking about. And that goes for these sorts of questions as well. The fact that we're sitting on a Zoom call staring at a grid of a few dozen people talking about this, at least on some illusory level, there's separateness. So whatever philosophy or sacred narrative we want to formulate that helps us get through the world and fulfill our highest potential, it has to somehow involve the being sheared off from our origin in order to return back to it. It just seems like a necessary thing.
Yeah. By the way, Rehane has an idea for everybody. She says we should definitely dance before going to bed tonight.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means, Rehane, but I have to go discuss it with my wife in a minute here.
I have to say, the last month or so, I've been doing yoga. Right before I crawl in bed, I've been doing about five minutes of yoga, and it makes a great difference. And then not exactly dancing, but it's trying to align one's movement in some way that's, I don't know, that's in alignment with something.
By the way,
beyond me.
Adib Masumian has added the quote from Abdul Baha that I think you used. He's got the link for the whole quote in here. Thank you, Adib.
Great. Okay.
All right. There's some more questions. They're coming fast and furious. Let's see. From Sue Emil to everybody, an ancient origin story says that the one divided itself into two as equal and opposite energy, forever connected in spirit, seeking each other. The question that I had asked you about the calendar, the person clarifies. She said, I may have misstated it, that she was asking about the Badi, the Baha'i calendar, and she's talking about the fact that we Baha'is have adopted cycles as an organizing principle for our individual and community life, such as expansion, consolidation, planning, action, reflection. So I think that was the cycle she was thinking about.
This idea that Sue refers to, the origin story of the one dividing itself into two, is at least one version of this is in the Timaeus of Plato, where he talks about the demiurge and the division, and he puts it in terms of he connects it to the idea of the circle of existence. He says there's a line, and the line gets divided into two, and then there's a rotation which creates this of circular motion. But the rotation is generated by a line which is divided into two. There is a tablet of Baha'u'llah's actually where he basically repeats this idea from the Timaeus. And I just stuck it in the chat for what it's worth. This was put in an old episode of Journal of Baha'i Studies back in the 1980s, and it was translated by Kevin Brown. But Baha'u'llah says, know then that God, praised and glorified be he, took a line, split it lengthwise in two, I'm not sure what that means, rotated the one about the other, and so made from them the universe. The line, however, formeth only from the point when you move it. Conceive ye then our meaning. If anyone can figure that out, shoot me an email.
Bijan Masumian says to everyone, thoroughly enjoyed the talk, Stephen. Didn't expect anything less. Thank you.
Thanks, Bijan.
I have a question that's slightly unrelated. This is me personally thinking aloud. If we are going through a cyclical process and we advance to a certain point, does that then mean that humanity starts to decline?
Yes.
Are we at the point of rising up? Are we heading up, or are we in the point of decline right now?
It's interesting that in this chapter on universal cycles and some answer questions, there's Abdu'l-Baha goes on to state, and this part of it is not published, but Abdu'l-Baha goes on to state that following the cycle of period of consummation is the cycle of decline. And that's the only place I've seen it mentioned in the Baha'i writings, because we're used to seeing this is the day which will not be followed by night. This is a kind of, we have this linear time idea that we're building something, and there's a reason for that, because you want to motivate people in the right way. And so we're trying to build a better world and a united world. But Abdu'l-Baha does say explicitly in one place that after the cycle of consummation does come the cycle of decline. He says it explicitly, but it's also quite clearly implicit in the whole statement about universal cycles. I mean, of course, there's a cycle of decline if everything has to be erased and kind of and start back over again. We're just not used to thinking about it or talking about it.
Yeah. We Hindus, former Hindus, define cycles as yugs, Y-U-G-S, yugs, a different age, a different, and I've been trying to convince many of my Indian friends that we are in the state of peace, Satyug. They're not buying it yet, but I'm trying. Other questions, comments? This has been just amazing, wonderful presentation. Anybody else have any thoughts for Dr. Phelps? Questions, comments? For those of you that are interested, please go to the Austin Assembly website, and Dr. Phelps' talk will be on the website as a YouTube link. I think I'm going to listen to it again, because even as I think I got a lot out of it, I think I will get a lot more out of it as I hear it again. I also heard you say something about, well, that is another talk, hour-long talk that you might want to give. So
I don't know if I want to give it.
I know you weren't volunteering, but we would love to get you to come back and do this again for us.
Sure.
For the audience out there, our next 3 speakers are scheduled as follows. Ken Bowers will speak in March. I know he's going to be speaking in the middle of the fast, and I hope, well, we'll just have to suffer through it. Ken Bowers in March, Dr. David Young in April, and David is now the chairman of the National Spiritual Assembly, and he will give a talk on the Baha'i faith and Christianity. And after that, in May, we have Faribur Saba. Faribur Saba is the gentleman that designed and built actually also the construction of the India Temple. And he will speak, and we're trying to get as many people invited as possible. Stephen, have you come across this book, Greg Braden's Human by Design?
I have not. Greg Braden.
Borrow it from your local library. It makes, as a Baha'i, it makes for the most interesting reading, because he basically goes back almost proving that humans were always humans. And he's a scientist. He is, if you just read Greg Braden online, you will see that he's fairly well known and probably moves in the same circles that you do. It's a book
Great,
well
thank-
worth reading.
Thank you.
Last minute questions, anybody? What a delight this has been. Thank you so very much. And again, I truly mean this. I would love to have you come back and do another presentation for us shortly.
Thank you. We'll find another time.
I have allowed people
Dr.
to unmute themselves if they want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you,
Uh,
Stephen. Thank
Much appreciated.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Now see you yoga.
Bye.
Please Google Dr. Phelps and watch some of his talks online. There's a bunch of his talks online, and I think you'll get great joy out of watching them. So thank you very much, everybody.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Stephen.
Good day.
Our love to Katharine, Stephen, and the girls.
All right. All right.
Nice.